Be ready, my dudes, we are getting edgy with this review. Time for a costume change. Oh, and while we're at it, let's desaturate the video and darken the border, okay? Alright, I look like a tool, the video is generic, uninspired, and just plain ugly, and more than likely I'm gonna get a hate comment calling me cringy in addition to the one saying that my voice is annoying. Perfect! We are in business, let's begin! While Sands of Time was a critical and commercial success, despite initially slow sales, the game didn't exactly rake in the numbers Ubisoft was going for at release. With that in mind, the direction its sequel, Warrior Within, would take was intended to market itself to an older, larger crowd and draw more attention to the IP. This means grittiness, brown, gray, red, dreary environments, heavy metal, profanity, blood, mutilation, scantily clad women. Basically the 2000s idea of what companies thought was considered cool, which in that era would spawn modern day punching bags like Shadow the Hedgehog, Daredevil with Ben Affleck, and DMC Devilman. Wait, that was this decade. So yeah, pretty heavy departure to the point where it got an M rating as opposed to Sands of Time's T rating, which more than likely is gonna result in this video getting demonetized because that always happens when I talk about M-rated games. I guess ad revenue's only gonna give me $2 this month instead of the usual $3. Might go without saying, but Warrior Within being such a heavy departure from what people liked about its predecessor at the time didn't exactly sit well with a number of people. Even series creator Jordan Mechner expressed he wasn't particularly fond of the direction Warrior Within took, which, fair enough, I doubt the creator envisioned this when creating this. Though oddly enough, despite initial reception being rocky, nowadays I've noticed a lot of people refer to it as the best game in the franchise. It's an interesting follow-up to Sands of Time, to say the least. In some ways, it's pretty identical to that game, but in others, it's a completely different beast altogether. Which, fine by me, I mean, it gives me a lot more to talk about, but as for what it means for the game quality as a whole, well, let's begin to find out. About 7 years after the first game, Warrior Within opens with the prince being pursued by some mysterious, shadowy figure, later cutting to the prince traveling across the sea, which gets intercepted by another ship full of raiders and some lady named Shadi. And I shit you not, she is literally introduced via camera shot of her ass. So yeah, most family-friendly video games since Honey Pop. Anyway, she seems relatively nice. Kill him. Or not. After a battle where the entire crew gets brutally slaughtered and Shadi kicks the prince's ass, we finally get some proper context about what the hell just happened. A scene plays with the prince talking to a wise old man about what's been tormenting him for the past few years. As it turns out, unleashing the Sands of Time, in addition to transforming everyone into horrific monsters, makes it so the person who opens them has to die. Even the prince undoing everything up to that point can't negate his fated death at the hands of the Dahaka, the guardian of the timeline. Poor bastard just can't catch a break, can he? The prince embarks on a journey to the Island of Time, the birthplace of the Sands, to change history and prevent the Sands from ever being created to save his life. In spite of repeated warnings that he'll never be able to change his fate, which, strangely enough, makes me think of A Christmas Story when everyone tells Ralphie that he'll shoot his eye out.
Your journey will not end well. You cannot change your fate.
You'll shoot your eye out, kid.
You cannot change your fate.
You'll shoot your eye out! You'll shoot your eye out!
When the prince makes it to the island after being thrown overboard, he re-encounters Shadi when she's trying to kill some other lady in a rather awkward position. Long story short, the prince kills Shadi and cements her role in the plot as completely fucking pointless. It turns out the other lady is named Kylina, and she essentially fills the role of female supporting character that Farah had in Sands of Time. Though rather than being a companion on your journey, she essentially acts as your guide through this unfamiliar territory and informs you on what needs to be done to eradicate the sands. Long story short, again, Prince goes through Island trying to destroy sand like an Anakin Skywalker wannabe while avoiding scary Shadow Tentacle Man. Unlike Sands of Time's narrative, which was more of a vehicle for developing the characters, Warrior Within is still like this to an extent, though it's notably a lot more plot heavy. The central theme of the story is that of defying fate by challenging what's supposedly set in stone and can't be undone. Conveying this is the aforementioned conflict of the prince evading his death, along with Kylina rebelling against her intended role in creating the Sands of Time. It generates an interesting dynamic between the two, where both characters are desperately fighting to be the one who changes their fate under the belief that only one can succeed. Contrasting heavily with the charming, light-hearted narrative in Sands of Time, Warrior Within is a more dark, grim, serious tale almost completely devoid of humor. Narrative structure is also pretty different, as the whole story is told in real time as opposed to a POV storybook-like plot, so instead of Yuri Lowenthal gracing your eardrums whenever you die, the screen gets sliced up and covered in blood. I cannot believe I just said that. I understand why this might not click with fans of the first game, but honestly, I love the direction this game took. Warrior Within being a dark, gritty sequel makes sense as the conflict is much more intense and quite frankly kinda disturbing when you really think about it. The prince is much older and spent the past few years of his life running just to stay alive, never being able to escape, even when traveling back in time as shown about halfway through the game. He's a broken shell full of anger and fear, all originating from when he was told to open the hourglass not knowing the consequences. I find this to be a very compelling narrative hook, since while the prince is more rough around the edges this time, he's still likable as a character, and you do go through the game wanting him to succeed and lift the burden off his shoulders. The conflict between the prince and Kylina subsequently is more of a tragic one, since neither character wants to fight the other but are essentially forced against one another. You can't help but want both of them some way somehow to have a happy ending. No discredit to Sands, but nothing about the plot from that game really came off as all that much of a surprise to me. You can pretty much always get a good idea of what direction the story in that game is gonna go. On the other hand, Warrior Within threw curveball after curveball, making it overall much more suspenseful. The whole time, I felt conflicted about whether I could actually succeed in my goal, or if all that I was fighting to achieve is simply doomed to fail. I think the game takes the whole dark, gritty sequel thing a bit too far. It's really unnecessary to have blood in the loading screens, and for the female enemies to have a BDSM fetish.
There's so much pleasure in pain.
I am very uncomfortable about the thought that me killing these enemies might actually be giving them sexual pleasure, but there is a narrative and thematic purpose for the game to be like this. You know, one that isn't just the game trying and failing to be cool and shocking. I too commend the game for being a lot more risky with time travel as a narrative device. It's admittedly confusing about how its rules in the universe work, but hey, it's time travel. Kinda comes with the territory, and to be fair, there are far more egregious examples of it out there. The one thing I do take issue with is the prince's voice. This time around, instead of Yuri Lowenthal, Robert Atkin Downes voices the character, and nothing against his performance, but the way he goes about doing it doesn't make me think of the same character from Sands of Time. Listening to both voices side by side, I'm really thrown off by the lack of an accent he has in Warrior Within.
I did not understand the meaning of what I had just seen, but I knew, with a certainty I could not explain, that those winged creatures had a master. The man who had tricked me into opening the hourglass now had his prize.
It is as they say. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. Leave her alone! You and I have unfinished business.
Also, I do take issue with the game's endings. Here's a timestamp to avoid spoilers about it. Unlike the other games, Warrior Within has a good and bad ending, which I mean very loosely because they're both pretty much identical. Dahaka is gone forever, the prince returns to Babylon, and lives happily ever after.
Your journey will not end well. You cannot change your fate. No man can.
Oh my
God, I shot my eye out!
Well, shit. The only difference between the two is that in the bad ending, Kylina dies, but in the good ending, she goes with you to Babylon with a fully clothed sex scene. What an unholy fuck are my senses being assaulted with right now? At least I now know what influenced Ride to Hell, but still, what is this? Why is this? How is this? You have to 100% the game to get this ending. Don't. So, putting that awkward ending aside, the plot is compelling and beautifully executed, depressing and gruesome, yet very much worth experiencing. It might be very far removed from what Sands of Time's plot was like, but hey, nothing's wrong with that. I suppose if you're going to change the narrative tone, you may as well also change the visual tone. While Sands of Time was more vibrant and fantasy-like, Warrior Within is a lot less elegant to say the least. The colors in the past are mainly different shades of brown throughout pretty much the entire island. I'm guessing it's to give off sort of a filthy, industrial feel. The color palette in the present is made up of different grays, as if to represent this horrible place being overtaken by nature and eroded away by, fittingly enough, time itself. Of the two, I definitely say I prefer the visual style of the present, since environmentally it looks a lot more intricate with the setting in ruins. Along with that, the prince just pops out more notably, and there's some truly gorgeous contrast with the use of flora and occasional bright, vibrant color. Not to say the color scheme in the past looks bad per se, it certainly captures the mood and atmosphere it's going for, and the occasional location like the garden looks stunning. But personally, I'm overall just not that big on the color scheme. All the shades of brown just kinda blend together, and the prince apparently gained camouflage powers because I think he just disappeared off the face of the earth. When you compare past and present side by side, in the former, he's a goddamn chameleon at times. I know, dark gritty sequel, but you can go dark and mature without sucking out all color. Okay, enough about the DC Cinematic Universe, back to the game. Regardless of my opinion on the overall art direction, the graphics technically are a step above Sands of Time. Textures are higher quality, environmental detail is increased, FMV cutscenes are notably less stiff, enemies give more visual feedback when taking damage with cuts and clouds of sand coming off of them, along with the whole mutilation and decapitation thing. Oh, and blood. Lots and lots and lots of blood. I may be a bit split on the art direction, but one thing for certain I can say that I adore is the soundtrack. Like before, the soundtrack contains Middle Eastern instrumentals, though this time more emphasis is placed on electric guitar, which I have no problems with at all. During combat, it really drives home the feeling of I am a badass and you just made the fatal mistake of trying to fuck with me. Now die. When the Dahaka shows up and tries to kill you, the music is basically the game's way of telling you,
I'm going to die!
When you get some time away from the action, the music becomes a lot more ambient and creepy, driving home the feeling that you're not safe anywhere you go. Now, all of that, well and good. But in terms of overall game polish, Warrior Within does kinda suffer in a few areas where its predecessor didn't. In Warrior Within, loading times tend to be a bit longer than they were in the last game. They're not unbearable, but kinda jarring when you compare it to Sands of Time, which had near instant load times on my end. From what I can tell, the length of a loading screen seems to be based around how far you are away from a save point when you died. It can get a bit tedious having to sit through these loading screens one after the other. At some points, when you're standing on just the right spot, some graphical glitch turns a good majority of what's on screen into some black, unidentifiable mess. Ubisoft, I get that you wanted Warrior Within to be a darker game than Sands of Time, but I don't think you go about doing it like this. On my end, audio for cutscenes has gotten pretty jacked up at certain points, with it either being completely desynced from the lip animations.
When a man is faced with his own death, he finds the impossible less of a barrier. Tell me how.
Very well.
Or just completely cutting out entirely. Hello? Can you please speak up? Or speak at all? Is this some practical joke the game is playing on me to make me go insane? Oh, now we've got this asshole in on the joke, and he doesn't even have a mouth. What I'm getting at is thank God for subtitles, and do not ever turn them off. Also, the game immediately jumping from in-game cutscene to pre-rendered cutscene can be pretty jarring.
You'll need this. It's more than just a weapon. It also serves to...
By the way, never subject yourself to the PS3 version, and if you do come in possession of it, use it as a coaster. That's all it's good for. The game is a step below Sands of Time in terms of technical polish, especially with a list of glitches far too large for me to properly articulate in this review, but there's still a lot to like here. It looks great, runs smoothly, and the soundtrack is pretty fucking badass. With how the game plays and controls, you should feel right at home if you're... Hold on. Oh hey, it's Maverick. I'm gonna mess with him. He'll never see this coming. You should feel right at home if you jump in after playing Sands of Time. Every button command is the same, and the overall feel with the control is pretty identical to the first game. I'm okay with this, as Sands of Time pretty much nailed this aspect, and if it ain't broke, don't break it. Maybe wall running could have been tweaked to better differentiate running up from forward, but hey, it was only a minor annoyance then, and it's only a minor annoyance now. Do some sweet-ass parkour, kill a bunch of evil henchmen dudes, and avoid the traps. Though while it all plays the same, Warrior Within has some major differences, whether it be creative liberties taken or tweaks and improvements made. Warrior Within feels like Dark Souls. Warrior Within feels like Sands of Time if it was set on hard mode. Most of the obstacles are reused from the last game, though their implementation requires more thought and caution to get past with every limb still attached to your body. They hurt quite a bit, taking away 1/4 of your health at default, and instead of sand for rewinding time being in heavy abundance, with new tanks popping in often, here you only get a maximum of 6 sand tanks throughout the entire game, and extra sand is a lot harder to come by, in turn still giving you a margin for error, but one that's a lot less forgiving. The game is built with the assumption that you've already played Sands of Time and know the mechanics, so now it wants to see how good you really are. I'm a pro, get on my level. For this reason, Warrior Within isn't exactly the best place for newcomers to jump in, though I really like the game being built like this, as it's a more out-of-the-box way for a sequel to expand on what the previous game had. Unlike the last game where you're on a linear track, Warrior Within's level design is built more like an open map free for you to explore. You'll be visiting the same areas multiple times and do the occasional backtracking as a result of this change, but honestly, I don't mind. Revisiting different parts of the map provides a perfect opportunity to abuse the fuck out of new weapons and powers to wreck everything that gave you trouble before. Backtracking can get tedious, but it thankfully doesn't take all that long to get from one point to the next. As you may have guessed when I brought it up earlier in this review, most of the game revolves around traveling in between past and present. It functions as two different versions of the same setting, similar to the Dark World mechanic from A Link to the Past or Metroid Prime 2. By entering a portal, the time period will change, which, in addition to the aesthetic difference, alters the level layout, allowing you to advance through areas otherwise unavailable in the other time period. It's a cool feature that breaks up potential monotony with navigating the island, but I feel there's a bit of unused potential with this mechanic. There could have been a bit more clever implementation by having you go through both time periods to solve puzzles or eliminate roadblocks in the present by making alterations in the past. I know there's a bit of an issue with time portals being their own separate rooms, but I don't think they all had to be like that. One could have been placed in a puzzle room for the sake of convenience. Regardless, there's a couple other major differences between past and present. In the present, you're constantly hunted down by the Dahaka, who's basically this game's version of Nemesis or Pyramid Head. Every once in a while, you'll come across a scripted chase sequence with the Dahaka, and all that you can do is run for your life life. This guy is relentless, and the only way you'll get him off your ass is to block his path with water because apparently that hurts him. Fucking wimp. These segments get really intense, and I love them for basically turning a game that's usually slow and methodical into one where you have to make whatever move you can as fast as you can. The screen losing color as Tadahaka gets closer to you only makes this more and more intense. The past has optional challenges off the beaten path where you'll find a life upgrade at the end. These were in the first game, but they were mostly semi-hidden areas that automatically gave you an upgrade upon finding them. In Warrior Within, you have to tackle hidden challenges that are often harder than anything that the main game throws your way. They're a fun little extra, and the life upgrade you get from beating them is legitimately rewarding. Though I'd recommend having a walkthrough when looking for them, as their locations can be pretty cryptic. Doesn't help that you need to get all of them to unlock the good ending, which is a design decision I'm still not very fond of. Why even do that? There's literally no good reason for that to be the case. Never mind that, I've put together a multi-page thesis on why Warrior Within's combat is actually the greatest thing ever created by mankind. I don't have time to go over it right here, so I'll just give a brief rundown of the combat. I don't know who designed the game's combat, but whoever did deserves all of the head pats because they did a good. The combat is so varied and dynamic that it could legit rival most hack and slash games. The absence of the Dagger of Time leaves your other hand open for either grabbing an enemy or picking up a secondary weapon. In addition to combos with your default weapon, you can also use the secondary weapon, string combos with the use of both, throw an enemy off a ledge, cut their head off when you grab a hold of them, deliver a powerful blow after parrying or dodging enemy attacks, and even utilizing the environment around you. Most enemies go down quicker with a specific attack, so I'd heavily recommend experimenting. For all these reasons, I'd say about half the fun I have with this game comes from the combat. It's so weird that the weakest aspect about Sands of Time is honestly my favorite aspect about Warrior Within, barring some unfair bullshit.
Thank you, Dark Souls.
Boss encounters are also much better this time. They're challenging, strategic, and exciting confrontations that always keep you on the edge of your seat. The overall game feel is very similar to that of Sands of Time, but the actual gameplay experience is a lot different. With that said, I can't find much of a reason to complain. I love it when game sequels do things like this. It might not be everybody's cup of tea, but it sure as hell mine. Warrior Within may be the black sheep of the Prince of Persia saga, at least where the Sands of Time arc is concerned, but there is a lot to love here. While it is pretty disconnected from a lot of what gave the previous game so much charm, in the end, it still retains all of the same strengths, even expanding on certain elements like the storytelling and combat. Honestly, I'm kinda baffled that a number of people out there consider this an example of a bad video game sequel or just a bad game in general. I understand if somebody isn't quite able to get behind the tone of the game, but past that is still a very solid, if buggy, action-adventure game with great platforming and a deep combat system. Trust me, I've played some really bad sequels before. Warrior Within is not what I consider to be one of them. If anything, I'd say I actually prefer this game over Sands of Time, if only for a lot of the annoying shit in that game being cut down. Either way you do feel about the game, I'd recommend at least giving it a try. You can get it on Steam for about the same price as Sands of Time, and it's a few hours longer, so if anything, you'll at least get your money's worth out of it. As for whether Warrior Within is my favorite game in the franchise, I'll give a definite answer to that when I go over the final game in the trilogy, but until then, take care. Thanks for watching. Holy fuck, that hat's stupid. How bad is my hair? Better not be that bad. It's fucking horrible. Great.